Welcome, everybody, to the Seen and Heard podcast, a conversational series. Today, I have the great pleasure of talking with Toby Ingham. Toby is a BPC and UKCP registered psychotherapist, supervisor, author, and member of the British Psychotherapy Foundation. He trained in the NHS at St Bart's Hospital and the Homerton Hospital in London. He has 25 years of clinical experience. His most recent book, launching this month through Karnak Books, is titled A Guilty Victim: Recovering Creativity After Trauma and Abuse. It's a compelling story of one man's recovery from childhood trauma, grooming, and sexual abuse at a Catholic boarding school. More on that later. He's also released several other books, including How to Improve Emotional Stability and Retroactive Jealousy, Making Sense of It. Welcome, Toby.
Thank you very much, Chris. Nice to be seeing you today.
Yeah, it's amazing to connect. I've really enjoyed our conversations over the last sort of 5 months or so, since we were introduced by Alex Renton.
That's
Uh,
right. That's right.
yeah, Alex was raving about an advance copy he'd seen of your new book, and said you really must connect with Toby and you must talk to this guy. So here we are. I'm really excited to connect and to explore some of these topics, some of your work as a psychotherapist, the book, and also some of what shaped you. So let's get into it.
Okay.
Mm. So I'd love to begin with finding out a little bit more about your early years, about what brought you in to adulthood, or brought you into the work that you now do, just to give us a bit of context. So you just tell me a little bit about your personal journey through the early years, through family life. How was it for you?
It was complicated, I suppose, by bereavement. So, lost my father, at an early age, and that had that it would be a lot for, I think, any family to adapt to and so on. It was difficult for us, and that made things difficult. I guess as we go on thinking about that development of yourself through time, if you've grown up without a parent, it's difficult to know what you've been missing out on. I have a great relationship with my own children, and when I think, well, I know I put a lot into those relationships and they into me. So to not have that yourself, it's hard to know quite what that what you're kind of running without, if you see what I mean. Mm.
Very sad to hear that, Toby. I can resonate very deeply, having lost my mum at 14.
Right.
You sort of don't know what don't know what you missed to some extent.
Yes, yeah, and I think I mean, maybe bereavement is always an ongoing process, isn't it? But I think particularly well, I can only speak of my own experience, that you are always aware of what's lost. I think when I was a child, there was an idea that you get over things or something ridiculous like that. Whereas the truth of the matter is that you live with loss, and that's just how it is now, and that's tough. It's manageable, but it's a kind of ongoing work in progress, which I would say from the start, I tend to think of most of my work as a work in progress.
I agree. I think sometimes people say, when will it get easier? When will I be healed? When will I be fixed? When will things be better? And ultimately, I always say, well, we'll be healing until there are no more tomorrows. And it's just a journey. It's a journey of acceptance and understanding and moving through. But thank you for sharing that about your father. Brings me great sadness to hear that. How did that shape things growing up? You said complex. How was
Well,
that?
I mean, I suppose if we bring it to school, I think it was very complicated, um, to work out what had happened and how to live. And I think I can certainly draw a line between, more or less through my whole education, had that suffered from not having a helpful framework around it. And so in my own story, I go through school in a very unsuccessful way. But having left, I then realised later in my 20s that I had an education to redeem, I suppose. So I then at that stage went back to studying and retook some O-level GCSEs, I think they were by that time, and then went and did a degree. And so picked everything up. But yeah, it certainly had an effect.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
Mm.
what were you into when you were young? What was exciting for you? What did you love?
The thing that I suppose one way of answering that anyway is play. I think my I think I have a bit of a talent for play, and I suppose it would make sense to me that a lot of the work I do as a psychotherapist is possibly helping people to recover their own capacity to play. And, so the book will come on to creativity, won't we? But I think being able to play, being able to be spontaneous, I have a, I've always had a way of being tuned into that. And that didn't go so well maybe at school because I think it doesn't encourage you to sit still and try and, I don't know, learn Latin or something. But it was good in the more dramatic areas and composition and writing and school plays and stuff like that. And in fact, when I did eventually leave school, I kind of ran away and joined the theatre and worked in theatre lighting for the best part of 10 years and found that I found that a very containing environment for me. I liked it.
Beautiful.
So
I can see
play,
what you mean.
yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned play. I mean, play, as we know now, it's sort of in the last 5 or 10 years, it's becoming much more of a part of the language around school, around emotional healing for adults, around young people, the importance of play, the importance of play. So, yeah, but it was something that sort of got sidelined a little bit in favor of educating young people, as opposed to nurturing, supporting, developing, helping young people to develop. So I know that language is coming back now, and it's great to hear that you bring that into your work. Um, and yeah, that's part of who you are. So that sounds really, really powerful.
Yes, and I mean, I think that, when I started reading people like, I don't know, Winnicott, you think of his book Playing in Reality, um, I could it really made sense to me that recovering spontaneity, particularly where there's been injuries and trauma, um, or any kind of psychic wound, I suppose, it's such a good measure of how we are, how people are.
Yeah, I think the stiff upper lip sort of psyche, if you like,
Right.
doesn't like play too much. There's sport, there's organized games, there's etc. But free play, I remember at my school, free play was held to an absolute minimum. Because it was usually organized in some capacity or another. There was a winner or a loser. There was a contest always. It wasn't sort of spontaneous. So, when you mentioned your school, what sort of school did you go to?
I went to a boarding school from 13, and I went to a kind of prep school, day school before that.
Mm.
But on the stiff upper lip type stuff, I mean, I read an incredibly interesting book about Shackleton and his journey back from the Antarctic to rescue everyone and so on. And I was thinking that it, the stiff upper lip got them through that. I might have gone to pieces, at so many points on that journey. So it does have its place, but yes, I think it's a very much a square peg, square hole type of situation, isn't it? And if you don't fit into that, and my education was pretty conservative, if you don't fit into that, then you just sort of stand out as kind of quite a complicated person. So yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm coming more in recent years to terms with the fact that I am a sensitive person, and sensitive people don't always do well in institutions where it's square peg, square hole. and where emotions are not, not particularly welcome, as you say, the stiff upper lip might get you to the North Pole, but it's a sort of, it's a wartime strategy, isn't it? It's not great in peacetime, or when you're trying to make connections.
No, no. I think it's attractive in some ways to think, okay, well, we're going to, double down, and but you have to have your psychology in a certain kind of shape for that to go well. And I think if you're going through a difficult time, then that's not so simple. I think that's not so simple.
Yeah, I think you're right there. The resilience word gets kicked around a lot, in the schools that we go into, it's seen and heard. Um, but I was sort of taught a nice one by my coach Piers Cross, which was anti-fragility, and it's something that I've sort of been living by for the last 3 years, and it really what speaks to me because it takes away some of that dissociative sort of bloody minded resilience, which some people have kind of come to operate with in their life, or come to see from the boarding school system, or whatever it might be, or the stiff upper lip. And actually, yeah, you're looking at an anti-fragility that comes from a knowing of self, an ability to be vulnerable, um, and from a sort of a more loving, open-hearted place. Does that resonate to you at all?
Well, it's interesting because when you say that word resilience, there's something in me that always reacts a bit to the idea that we've got a word we can use, that it's like we've got a strategy in place. And I don't know what it is about it, but I tend to always feel myself reflexively draw away. And that's not to say that I'm not without resilience, but um, I don't like the idea of it being put into a package somehow. It somehow goes against something in me, or I just don't sit well with it. I don't know. And so, I mean, it's like ideas about, diagnoses. I recognize that some diagnoses are very useful, but others, it seems to me, get thrown around so quickly that it's difficult to know to what degree they're helpful. And so I mean, I'm always interested to take the more longhand view of people's situations and to try and understand what's happened to us and why we might be struggling at school, rather than to say, you've got ADHD, therefore, as though you kind of woke up with it one morning or something like that. Um, and resilience, it's like there's something valuable in that word, of course, but at the same time, as I say, I always find myself a little bit suspicious of it, and that's maybe that's a bit of a weakness of mine as much as anything else. I don't know.
Yeah, I can understand that. I think resilience has a bit of a tricky word for me as well. So I think because of its misuse,
Mm.
versus let's say dissociation, yeah, it's or compartmentalization or whatever it is, that they can sometimes be kind of bleeding across into each other a little bit from resilience, I find.
Well, really, I think you need a very bespoke language
Mm.
because you're generally trying to, or in the work I do anyway, you're generally trying to understand why someone's here. What's brought them, and what is the problem with adapting to a new life circumstance or whatever it might be. And that is always very particular. So, I mean, you might say, well, I lost a parent, and, you lost a parent, and that's a kind of common thing. But of course, our experiences of that would be so particular. And like I say, I think the work I'm interested in is being able to help people make sense of what's happened to them.
So important, yeah.
Mm.
It's the Gabor Mate one, isn't it? It's not so much what happens to you, it's what you make it mean. And
Okay.
that can be quite powerful, can't it? Um, in the healing process, and understanding people's beliefs and self-limiting stuff and fulfilling potential. And mm,
Yes, because I think you can tap into quite a bit of energy when you look at it like that,
mm,
and you can start to see when, as you say, what something might mean. That can be quite empowering
mm,
in a way that other kinds of language, I think, can you will take the energy out of you.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Toby. So you mentioned prep school into boarding school. Um, we hear a lot in our work at Seen and Heard about people who kind of seamlessly flowed through that process and others who found it a real wrench away from home. What was your personal experience of going away at 13?
Well, my initial feeling was one of excitement because my own home was quite complicated at that
Mm.
time, and I thought this, this could be an adventure, I suppose. I did suffer with homesickness, and I suppose I suffered with bullying as well. I think I was kind of I suppose I didn't really know what to make of it. A lot of people who were in my peer group had been at a boarding school from an earlier age, and they they knew how it worked, I guess. I didn't, and quite quickly the excitement turned into, you know, what the hell am I doing here? But over time, it worked. It was okay. I Yeah, it was okay in respect that I settled in. It wasn't okay in that there was really no um, clear structure around me. I mean, I was at a boarding school in a particular place at a particular time where the group of people I was in just stopped living by the rules, and the school didn't have any answer to that. So, being someone who was already struggling to keep focused on the education, things deteriorated from a sort of certainly educational and conservative position, and yeah, it was it ended up being I think being a bit of a fiasco. But in one way, I can't. That wasn't so bad. It certainly wasn't as bad as losing your father. So it was I don't know, complicated. I think my main observation is that it was without pastoral care, right? So there was at no point did anyone say, hang on a minute, this person needs some sort of stabilizing. I mean, I suppose in a way I've tried to become the therapist I would have liked to have met, because my work on helping people improve emotional stability, helping people understand what's happened to them. I mean, if only someone had just said, "Look, this has happened. You've got an opportunity here to get into some, education. You're not stupid, um, but we need to put it in a framework." But of course, when I was at school in the 70s, that wasn't how it went. The schools just seemed to. I think my school had a view that a certain amount of people would come through it well, and then the rest of the people who didn't. Well, there you go.
Collateral damage. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm. Mm.
So I've never gone back. I think I did go back there once because I was working on a theatre tour, and we ended up in the same town. So I did go back there then to have a look, and I've reconnected with it a tiny bit over the years, but I can't really say that I walked away from that feeling kinship, or that I wanted the school tie or anything. So a bit of a waste in some way, in lots of ways.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that, Toby. I can resonate with that. I didn't reconnect with anything to do with my school stuff, including my experience there, the people, my friends that were there at the time, until very recently, until the sort of healing work had really kind of started to come full circle, and I started to open those doors again. And yeah, reconnecting with friends from school recently has been really wonderful. But for 20 years, I didn't want to know, just reinvented myself, changed my accent, moved on, and never looked back. I think it was yeah, a big disconnection from it. And as you say, it's whilst I got some gold from those years, the sport stuff particularly, the the wound of going away at an early age to board has informed the work I do now. And you mentioned that yourself. Perhaps you've become the therapist you wish you had back
Yeah,
then. Yeah.
yeah. I think I could have been quite helpful to,
Mhm.
Toby Ingham age, sort of 14, 15. It would have been it would have been useful.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I see that now with my teenage girls when they come home, bring home, you know, challenges from the local school. I think, my goodness, I would hate for them to be going through this without someone there, every night to talk to and to share this stuff with, because it sounds not just school stuff, but just their life, their development, they're becoming adults. I find it very difficult to see that. Mm.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing some of that early stuff. So we've got a bit of a flavour now of, yeah, perhaps as you started to build your career, and you said you went back to study in your 20s,
Mm.
um, to become that therapist that maybe you wish you had. So, can you tell me a little bit more about that journey through sort of, what kind of a young adult did you come out as, and what were you needing, and what were you out there looking for in the world?
I think, I mean, I was relieved to have left school, but I was, I think that things were quite chaotic. As I say, working in theatre was a good place for me. Um, what was your question exactly? What did I
Oh,
come
it's
out?
really so, yeah, just the journey through sort of adulthood into the work that you're starting to train for the work that you did now,
Well,
because obviously you had the career in the theatre. So,
yes. I worked in theatre, and at a certain point, I could see that I needed to move on. That this was a temporary, this was a holding pattern, and I could see that there was some education that had been so neglected in this whole formal period. And at that point, I mean, I was fortunate. I went to Goldsmiths and did English, and they had a mature student program, and the English department was led by someone who I think had been a mature student himself. And I got lucky, really. I got really lucky, I think, in that I don't think there were that many options open. There probably were, but I don't know how many I'd have seen. I could just see one route, and that got me to Goldsmiths and did a degree there, left there, and then did a master's, um, and then just went to work because by that time I was so broke, I would take any job that came along, and I ended up working in business development in sort of media. And then there was a point. I mean, I'd been in therapy for a long time myself during this period, during all of that. And then I think in my mid 30s, I thought I could afford to retrain. And all these things I was doing were very meaningless for me, really. Though they did bring in income. I think the income suffered, but I've always had to feel that I am doing things that I absolutely want to do. I'm lousy at trying to do things I don't want to do, and so I started to train, and started off at Regent's College, which I didn't really care for. Did another MA there, and then went and started again doing psychotherapy training, and that went on for quite a long time, but was very rewarding. And I haven't really looked back. I would say. I mean, let's see how that statement plays out, but.
yeah. Thanks for sharing that. I think that's one of the things. Obviously, training as a therapist, you're doing your own therapy as well. Then once you're a therapist, you've got your supervision, and you might have your other stuff. And so, always fascinated if you're willing to share a little bit, with your therapeutic journey. Obviously losing your dad, boarding school, prep school, boarding school. Um, what's been your work, that you've needed to do? What's been the challenges that you've had to sort of grow through and come to terms with?
Well, I think if I was putting that in a kind of nutshell, I think I didn't understand for a very long time the way I had a I had a sort of struggle keeping track of my own emotional stability, I would say. And so, I mean, if you train in psychoanalysis, psychoanalytic psychotherapy, you inevitably learn more and more about um, the kind of world you've come from and the way you've internalized that world and the way you project that world into the relationships you have. You do learn all about that. But the thing I think that you may maybe not learn is how to look after emotional stability on an ongoing basis. So I think a lot of psychoanalytic work can get quite caught up in stressing where we've come from rather than necessarily thinking about the problem we might have where we're going. Yeah. And that's, I suppose, as where I've come to in my own work, is that I think it's not enough just to know about your object world, your in whatever you've, internalized and so on. You need, I would say, it's helpful to have an understanding of how to look after yourself on a day-to-day basis. And that goes into some practical facts, like if you have a problem with your emotional stability, if you're a little bit more uppy downy and a bit more excitable or low mood, then you need to be careful around drink and drugs, for example. So I meet a lot of people who know all about what went wrong in their lives, but they struggle to maybe live well in the present because they keep drinking. And alcohol is a disaster for someone who has a very shaky foundation, and it always will be.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you, Toby. That speaks to me very deeply as someone who was an alcoholic for
Right. Okay.
25 years.
Okay.
I quit drinking 3 years ago when I had my breakdown, and yeah, I was a very good drunk, I might
Okay.
say, but ultimately I needed alcohol to relax, to take the edge off my anxiety, and my emotional regulation was based on over drinking and over exercising. So it's been the last 3 years have been a journey to like you say, to find tools, structure. Um, so to go, I do think sometimes you have to go back to go forward. So you do need to go back to the earlier stuff. You do need to unpack it, understand it, come to
Yeah.
terms with it. But then yeah, you can get lost. Then I've seen people get quite lost in a kind of a very left brain, analytical, sort of bookish way of looking at their difficulties and where they came from, etc. There isn't a lot of connection to the emotion of it for the
Yeah.
first, they haven't looked at how the impact on the body or health or on behaviors and things. And then there often isn't then a follow through to, okay, so what does that mean on a Monday morning when I'm feeling low mood, or what can I start to bring in? And yeah, does that sort of speak to your experience as well?
Yeah. I mean, I think that if you're interested, if whatever's going on, the more we can work out how to look after ourselves today and ongoing, the better. Because at the very least, it means we won't probably be having to deal with what we did today. Okay. And like I say, I think drugs are are terrible for people who have um, a shaky foundation, or as I kind of call it in a shorthand, a problem with emotional stability. And I think that you can really do a lot to help yourself by just not drinking and taking drugs. And what's curious in a way is the way in which people keep on doing it, even when they've established that that's where you're throwing yourself back into traumatic recollections and destructive repetitions and so forth.
Yeah, yeah, I can hear that. Yeah, I think the suite of changes I've brought in the last 3 years to sort of get better, they really are far-reaching. It's from all the nutrition, diet, and exercise side of things. No booze, no caffeine. Meditation, yoga, therapy, and not just therapy that looks back, but therapy that works on kind of now creating an inner world, a daily inner world that serves you and that you can feel supported by, or things like emotional freedom technique, which tapping for self-regulation or breath work. So there's this huge armory of tools and levers that you can pull on. But I think what I see quite a lot is people say, "Oh, counselling didn't work for me, or therapy didn't work for me." They might have gone and done 6 sessions of CBT on the NHS, and wondering why after that they're still feeling lousy, and then they start to feel a little bit thrown away by the system, and unfixable, and all these words come out when actually it's quite a holistic approach to getting well. We are what we do. So if you have to do well every day to feel well. So I can really hear what you're saying. But drink and drugs are, as someone who's done a fair share of both in their time, they sometimes feel like the only solution when you're at the bottom of the well. So
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I guess the sooner you can recognize you're at the bottom of the well and that another drink is just going to keep you there, or make it even more destructive and so on, the better. I mean, I tend to think, you mentioned that the emotional stability book. So I wrote this book, which I guess we can talk about, A Guilty Victim. Come back to that. And I was just having such a problem getting it published that I wrote a couple of other books along the way. And one of them was about emotional stability. And so one of the ways in which I came to think of emotional stability is it's a bit like knowing you've got a problem with an ankle. Okay? If you forget that you've got a problem with an ankle, then you just tend to sprain it all the time and you can't keep running or whatever you like doing. If you remember you've got a weak ankle and you look after it on an ongoing basis, then you tend to be able to carry on doing, you can do the running, you can do everything you want to do. You just have to remember you've got that vulnerability. And I think that's helpful. Certainly it's helpful to me. Remember where the vulnerability is and look after that.
yeah, thank you very much, Toby. Yeah, that's a really good way of looking at it. It's just sort of, yeah, know those challenges, accept them, own them, have some
Yeah,
strategies around them, love them. I mean, that was a big thing for me, was love, love my foibles, my challenges, know where they came from. Okay, that's a wounded younger part, for me, and to show some love and appreciation to that part, and to know some ways to now sort of self-parent them, support them when the little voice shouts, "Ah, I'm scared, I'm angry, I'm sad, I'm not good enough," all those things. Okay, there you are. I help you. I help you through that now with these things that I've built for you. It's very powerful stuff.
it's interesting that, isn't it? Because I think there are parts of us that may always be a bit difficult to live well with, and most of the time we don't encounter them. But every so often, something will happen, and you'll just be aware that you have this, I don't know, this tendency to do something, whatever it might be, I don't know. And it's hard to accept that for all the work we've done, we still find ourselves slightly flawed in various places. And it's difficult. And so it's an ongoing work, I think, to come to terms with our flaws. But that's a better place, it seems to me, than walking around with a stiff upper lip.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, with a wound that bleeds on everyone around you often as well. So and that's what we see too often in our work, seen and heard, and I know it in my personal journey is, yeah, those wounds do bleed on the people around you, and at least if you've got them in awareness, you can know that you can, yeah, try and damage limitation, some healing and repair. But yeah, I really appreciate you touching on sort of emotional stability. Um, for your work then, as so you've been practicing, 25 years of clinical experience. That's a lot of experience out there. You've got your own boarding school journey. How's boarding schools shown up in your work and in your practice over those years?
Well, perhaps at that point I can tell you a bit more about my new
Mm.
book.
Yeah,
So I've just got a copy of it here, actually, so I can show you it. Well, so this is A Guilty
beautiful. A
Victim.
guilty victim, Toby
Uh,
Ingham. Yeah.
and it's, as you'll see on the front cover, we have an illustration.
Mm.
And the book has a subtitle of Recovering Creativity After Trauma and Abuse. So I met someone who in the book is called William Smith, and he uh, was in his 50s when we met. And he came to see me because of a problem with low mood, depression, and some other things like that. And he was focusing on where he was now. And as we talked, we found a narrative thread that went back to a period at boarding school. And he wasn't really paying too much attention to that. But somehow we found a way of continuing to talk to each other. I say that because a lot of therapy breaks off prematurely, and a lot of, like you said earlier, some people might just come for a few sessions. In this story, we had the chance to follow something through and to understand how he was vulnerable before he went to a boarding school and what the consequence of being vulnerable was at a school where there were proper threats, where there were people that could pick up on a vulnerable person and use that vulnerability to exploit, to groom, to abuse. So that, I suppose, is one of the clearest stories of boarding school that come to my mind right now as we're speaking. Because obviously, a lot of my attention's been going into this book. But I tend to think that the main problem was the vulnerability he took there. And that vulnerability was based on attachment wounds, attachment issues that predated boarding school. Boarding school then became the environment in which those things turned out to be, um, difficult characteristics to have taken with you. And particularly because we don't necessarily understand what our vulnerability means when we're, children. Um, so I haven't concentrated exactly on boarding school syndrome as some people have, but I have always tried to understand the the kind of context of what's happened to people. So the reason for the picture on the book is that William, in Across the Work, he started off being someone who had a kind of internalized prohibition against any creativity. And over the work, he went on to produce a timeline. I can just show you a bit, actually, if I can find it. So something like this, where he sketched
Mm.
out the way in which he understood the events that had happened. And one of the things that I hope people might relate to in the book is that if you can make sense of your context, so for you, like perhaps losing your mother, for me losing my father, if you can understand the contexts of your life and start to see what's happened to you, you can I think you can make some sense of things. My feeling is that, it's not that there's something wrong with us. It's really that something happens to us. The problem is we can just lose track of what's happened to us. And that then becomes the work. How do you make sense of what's happened? And beyond that, how do you live well so that you stop those things that have happened from having an ongoing negative effect years and years or decades later in this case?
Thank you, Toby, for sharing a bit about that. I read one of the reviews of the book that was really glowing, and it said there was a kind of a bio tapestry of through the creativity, through the drawings and the artwork, and the client coming to terms with what had happened and what he made it mean and how it was showing up in his life, etc. That bio tapestry really stuck with me. So creativity as a portal to understand people's experiences is now, again, like play, is becoming very much, I mean, art therapy's been there for decades, but is becoming more I think, more accepted, more used. We advocate to a creative writing for wellbeing service, for instance, from Seen and Heard, called Out of Bounds, which helps ex-boarders to come to terms with
Yeah.
their experience through creative writing. How did you get going with the artistic creative side of things in the process?
It emerged organically there. So it started with a tiny post-it note that William produced, which actually was that little triangle. That triangle image there
Okay.
is a boy folded in on themselves, and that one image was shown to me on a post-it note. We'd been having conversations for some time, and I was interested, and I suppose I was a bit encouraging to know more about this, but it became the beginning of images being it became permissible to show images, and they're not, you know, Michelangelo ceilings here. We're talking about um, ordinary images that William just started using as a kind of alternative vocabulary, and it. And you mentioned the Bayeux Tapestry, so by chance, the Bayeux Tapestry was it was planned around the time that we were working that it was coming to the UK on some sort of presentation, and it's a really interesting. I didn't know anything about the Bayeux Tapestry before I got into this, but I think it's about 30 meters long. It's a very interesting thing, and it's a timeline essentially. So um, the world kind of met us, I suppose, and encouraged the possibility of drawing timelines, be that through the Bayeux Tapestry, or be that through the images William was finding he could access and share. And so gradually, as he started to consider more and more about what had happened to him and the way that had an impact on how he was living now, it coincided with creativity um, being permitted.
Thank you, Toby, for introducing. Yeah, that's creativity as another language. I think was something he sort of said, and they gave him another language to explore. I think that's so powerful.
Yes.
Often words can't do it a lot of the time, so we have to process things somatically with our bodies, or we have to process through painting or writing or drawing or whatever it might be, and or play,
Or-
movement.
exactly. I
Yeah.
mean, and I think the imagery, the recovery of creativity in the story is the recovery of a certain kind of play.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
And
Yeah.
I hope, because it's a true story of one person recovering from the experience of trauma, grooming, abuse at a boarding school. But I really hope that people are going to relate to this and
Mm.
see that they they might be inspired to draw their own timelines and to play with those a bit.
Yeah, yeah, I think that'd be really inspirational for
Mm.
people, and it's got me thinking. I look at my wall here, and I've got 14 A4s up on the wall. When I was on my first podcast, and I had to tell my story, I had to get my story straight because so much of it was sort of behind a paywall of dissociation. Some of it was lost, some of it was too painful to talk about, and I had to get my head straight. So I've got my own kind of bio tapestry up here on the wall, and I look around, but. Yeah, I love that idea that might inspire people to start to have a look at what happened as a timeline as well.
Well, I mean, because this has just been in my head, in William's head, I mean, the book's been being written for such a long time, and
Mm.
by which I mean, say, 6, 7 years.
Wow.
And so March the 13th, which is only a week or so away now,
Mm.
is actually the point where I can see what other people make of this set of ideas, and that's exciting.
Yeah, yeah, very excited for the launch, and I know we'll be doing some stuff with it on Seen and Heard to get
I'd
it
be
out
happy
there.
to do it, to get involved with that. So just tell me about that. Yes.
Yeah, we'll run a competition to win some copies and do some good stuff because I think speaking to Alex about it, Alex Renton, he's read an awful lot of stuff, and when he was raving about this book, I thought, okay, there's something special and different about this, and then kindly sent across, some of the manuscripts, and it really uh, to have something that looks at the partnership, the relationship and collaboration between the therapist and the client is so lovely because some case studies are written, they're very dry, they're very academic.
Yeah.
or they're completely written from the client side, and you don't necessarily get a sense of the interactions with their guide, coach, mentor, therapist, whatever it might be. So this was lovely to see a partnership and a journey and a relationship, because ultimately relationship is the key determinant of therapy, whether it's successful or not.
Yes, I mean it's really been a collaboration. When I started, the reason the book exists is that William had drawn these pictures and said that this was at the end of the work. He said that he thought there should be a book which should be illustrated with the pictures.
Yeah,
And I mean, isn't it amazing that here it is?
yeah, that's so cool. Yeah.
So I really wrestled with what form. I didn't. I mean, I've read lots of case studies. I found some of them really useful, but a lot of them are very hamstrung by the way they go out to protect anonymity. But in this case, I had permission, and I didn't have to worry about that. And then as I wrote it, I would show it to him, and it's been a so anyway. When it came to actually the structure of the book, I really wrestled with how does this work. I didn't want it to be, he said, he said, he said, he said. So I've tried to, when events happen in William's life, I've tried to show them in full narrative, show not tell.
Mm.
And yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what people say. We'll come back to that.
Yeah, yeah, indeed. We'll
Alex,
definitely
I mean,
will.
Alex was really was a wonderful response from Alex. So and here we are having a chat. So
Yeah, it's fantastic, and I think it raises so many topics as well that are very much in the news at the moment. It covers grooming, it covers abuse in institutions, and we know because of everything that's been in the press for so long now, whether it's schools and institutions, scouts, ballet schools, Harrods, the church. It's just
yeah,
abuse scandal after abuse scandal
yeah,
really at the
yeah,
moment,
yeah, yeah.
and so it's a wound that we see in around 4 in 10 people who come to Seen and Heard have suffered some kind of physical or sexual abuse at their school, and which is way ahead of what would be a national average in this area. So it's going to speak to people who've been through the system.
Well, that is my hope. I mean, my hope is that someone who has suffered the kinds of things that are explored and discussed and so on in the book, I hope that the book might have a value for them. That's it. That a victim out in the world, because there are so many things in the book that like the Church of England thing. In this story, the priest that abuses William was moved from one part of the British Isles to another part of the British Isles. I would guess that he was moved because there was a stink developing in place A. So when you see what happened with Smythe and Welby and those kinds of people, I think this book is relevant.
It's highly relevant. It's highly. I mean, at the moment they're looking at legislation for the mandatory reporting of child sexual abuse. In Yvette Cooper's looking at that, but it's looking sadly like a very watered down version unless we can get some changes brought in very quickly. But mandatory reporting would have helped massively those situations where people were
Yes.
protecting reputational interests ahead of young people, where people were being sort of put out to pasture or moved on quietly, or it would have been, if you make it a criminal offence not to report known or suspected abuse of a child, then people are going to think, well, hang on, I've got to say something, otherwise I could be on the hook for this. It lets people know what the right thing is to do in no uncertain terms.
And that is more necessary than we realized it was. We
Mm-hmm.
might have thought that there's a lot of people out there who will do good things when they see bad things, but that isn't how it works.
No, no, it's very sadly not the case because of it's complex, and there are, there are jobs to be protected, there are institutions to be protected. There's what if I'm wrong? What if I missaw something? What if I don't understand? There's so many reasons not to, that only a law that says no, it's like wearing a seatbelt. When we made that mandatory 30 years ago, how many lives have been saved since? Before then, it was sort of a recommendation and there were public awareness campaigns, and you kind of relied on people to do the right thing. We needed a law for that, and we need a law for this. So I think it's really powerful that you bring grooming, you bring abuse, institutional abuse, and so importantly for me, because the press are all over those sort of salacious abuse stories, no one ever talks about the healing journey.
Yes,
Yeah, they talk about the
absolutely.
legal side, but they never talk about that individual, that victim, the impact on them, and what it takes to come back to some kind of fullness and and a life that they can be comfortable with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this story that I've written here, um, it is a redemptive story, right? I think it's a rich story, but we come to a point where let's see what people say to that. William has an idea in the book that for example, there are 4 or 5, I think 4 paragraphs written that describe grooming in the book. William thinks, well, those paragraphs should be in every common room, police station, ballet school, scout hut, Church of England administrative office. They should be everywhere where there is a safeguarding position. I think so. So we're addressing these themes, but we're looking at what kind of recovery is possible, and that's where the creativity, the play that I was talking about earlier in terms of my own thing. I think that's where we came round to that, my hope is that anyone can draw a timeline of what's happened to them, and like I say, it's not that there's something wrong with us; it's that things have happened to us. We just lose sight of that when we're traumatized.
Thank you, Toby. Thank you so much. Just conscious of time, as you said, you needed to start to wrap up now. You okay for a couple of minutes while we just bring
Yeah,
it?
absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely.
thank you, thank you.
Yeah.
Um, I think with this important book coming, it's coming on a tidal wave of a movement around protecting young people and supporting young people, education, safeguarding, etc. There's a real wave behind the boarding school survivors or boarding school experience, with Piers Cross's film Boarding on Insanity, that's had its premiere last weekend, and that's out in the middle of the month online. So your book is coinciding with that, with other books from new books from Nick Duffel, Nikki Moxie, Linda Devereaux, and others that are really starting to talk about this stuff. And it's so key because every time someone speaks about it, services like ours or therapists' waiting rooms or they start to fill up with people asking the right questions, the questions that are going to help them fulfill their potential and come to some sort of safety, healing, and emotional stability, as you've said.
Yes, I mean let's see. But I'm hopeful that to contribute in a way that, as I say, that somebody might read this and think this makes a bit of sense.
Mm. Thank you, Toby. Is there anything else before we finish? Is there anything else you'd like to say about your work, about the book? Let people know where they can get it from.
Well, no, I mean, I've really enjoyed our conversation, and it's been great to talk the way we have about boarding school, about the
Mm.
book, about emotional stability. In terms of getting hold of this book, it's available through Karnak from March 13th, and it's also available through Amazon, Waterstones, all the bookshops. So, um, please read it, write reviews on it, tell me what you think about it. Let's have a conversation about it.
Beautiful. Well, we'll do. We'll make sure the information is in the show notes of this podcast. And how can people get hold of you if they want to know a little bit more about your work or get in touch?
So perhaps you can include a link to my website,
Mhm.
and then if people want to talk to me, they please get in touch. It's not hard to find me if someone wants to.
Beautiful. Well, we'll make sure people can find you. Well, I just wanted to say it's been an absolute pleasure today, and I just wanted to deeply honour William and your work with William. And William, if you're out there and you're listening, incredible journey. bless you for your courage to bring this in out with Toby's help, and to be doing your work and moving to a place where you can live a full life. So yeah, my heart is with you, and for anyone listening who who's been affected by grooming, by abuse, by difficulties in their early years, bereavement. We've touched on losing a parent as well. There is a healing journey to be had for everybody, but it all starts with asking for some support and reading books like this. So, huge thanks, Toby, for your time today, and yeah, we'll look forward to maybe a future conversation. We'll see how the book's gone down. I'm sure it will. I'm sure it will lead to many more open doors for you.
Well, if so, they've started with the conversations I've had with Alex, with you. So thank you very much for today, and I really like what you've just said about William. I'm sure he will be interested to watch our conversation or listen to it. So let's speak again.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Toby Ingham. And I'd like to thank you very much for watching the Seen and Heard podcast. And we'll say goodbye for now. Please keep an eye out for new episodes each week. Take care.
Bye.